They're recording this now, February of 1952, and I'm sitting here in this chair, trying to remember a world that doesn't exist anymore. I was born in 1867, which makes me ... Let me see. 85 years old this spring, if I make it that far. The young fellow running this machine asked me to talk about Los Angeles when I was a boy, back in the 1880s, and I said I would because somebody ought to remember what it really was like before it all changed. Before the freeways and the sprawl, and all these buildings everywhere you look. People today, they think Los Angeles was always this big modern city, but that's not how it was. Not even close. My father, he came out from Ohio in 1865, right after the war ended. He wasn't a soldier, had a bad leg from childhood, some kind of fever that twisted it up, but he could work, and he had a good head for business. He opened a hardware store on Spring Street, sold everything from nails to plows to cooking pots. That's how we made our living. My mother, now she was different. Her people had been here since the Spanish days, when California was still Mexico. Her maiden name was Serrano, and her father had owned land up in the hills, cattle land mostly, but by the time I was born, most of that was gone. Sold off or taken in lawsuits or just ... Well, that's how it went for a lot of the old California families. She spoke Spanish at home when I was real small, but my father wanted us to speak English, said it was an American city now and we needed to sound American. I think that hurt her, but she didn't argue much. That wasn't her way. We lived above the store when I was young. 3 rooms that smelled like iron and wood oil from the merchandise below. I had an older brother, Emmett. He was 4 years ahead of me, and a sister, Cora. She was 2 years younger. Emmett was always bigger and stronger, always trying to prove something. You know how older brothers are. Cora was quiet, liked to read when she could get books, which wasn't often. The 3 of us shared one room with a curtain down the middle for Cora's privacy. You could hear everything through those walls. My father's cough at night, my mother praying her rosary in Spanish when she thought nobody was listening. Right next to our building, there was a laundry run by a Chinese man, everyone called Mr. Wong. I don't know if that was really his name, or just what people called him because they couldn't be bothered to learn his real name. He had a son about my age, but the boy didn't go to school with us, worked in the laundry instead. Mr. Wong was always polite, always nodding and smiling, but you could see he was tired. His hands were red and cracked from the hot water and the lye soap. My mother sometimes brought him food, tamales or bread, and my father said she shouldn't. Said it would look bad for business if people thought we were too friendly with the Chinese. But she did it anyway when he wasn't watching. I remember that about her. Small rebellions. Los Angeles then. It's hard to explain to someone who only knows it now. It was dusty and small, and it still felt like a Mexican town in a lot of ways, even though the Americans had been running things for 30-some years by then. The plaza was still the center of everything, with the old church and the market, where Mexican women sold chiles and corn, and things my father wouldn't let us buy, because he said we needed to eat American food now. But the smell of those chiles roasting, I can still smell that if I close my eyes. The school I went to was just one room, up on 4th Street, run by a woman named Miss Abernathy, who had come out from Massachusetts, and never let anyone forget it. She was thin as a rail, and wore the same black dress every single day. Or maybe she had 7 black dresses that all looked the same. I don't know. She had a ruler she'd crack across your knuckles if you spoke Spanish in class, and she did it to me twice before I learned to keep my mouth shut. There were maybe 30 of us in that room, all ages mixed together, the little ones up front and the older boys in back. Emmett sat in the back row and spent most of his time carving things into the desk with his pocket knife when Miss Abernathy wasn't looking. I was somewhere in the middle, trying to learn my letters and numbers and not get hit with that ruler. We had one book we all shared, McGuffey's Reader it was called, and we'd take turns reading out loud while Miss Abernathy walked up and down the rows listening for mistakes. The room smelled like chalk dust and sweat, and the lunch pails we brought, usually cold beans or bread with lard, sometimes an apple if we were lucky. After school, Emmett and I would run off into the hills, the ones that are all covered with buildings now, but back then were just wild land with sage and scrub oak and rabbits everywhere. We'd take sticks and pretend we were soldiers or cowboys or whatever game we'd made up that day. Sometimes we'd go all the way up to where you could see the whole town spread out below, just a few streets really, and the river winding through, though by summer it was usually just a trickle. You could see the vineyards from up there, rows and rows of grapevines that some of the old families still kept, and the orange groves that were just starting to come in. The air smelled different then, cleaner maybe, or just different, because there weren't so many people and horses and wagons kicking up dust all the time. Cora never came with us on those adventures. Girls didn't do that kind of thing, but sometimes I'd see her watching from the window above the store, and I think she wanted to. She'd wave, and I'd wave back, and then Emmett would punch my arm and tell me to quit being soft. The plaza was where everything happened on Saturdays. My mother would take us there to buy things we couldn't get at my father's store. Vegetables mostly, and things for cooking that she said had to be fresh. There were Mexican women sitting on the ground with baskets of tomatoes and onions and peppers, and they'd call out in Spanish, trying to get you to buy from them instead of the woman next to them. My mother would talk to them in Spanish, haggling over prices, laughing at something one of them said, and for those few minutes, she looked different, younger somehow, like she was back in a world where she belonged. But then we'd leave and walk past the American shops, and she'd get quiet again. I remember one woman there, older, with a face like old leather from the sun. She sold the best tortillas, and every time we went, my mother would buy a dozen wrapped in cloth, and she'd hold them against her chest like they were something precious. My father never knew about those tortillas. We'd eat them before he got home, and my mother would have American bread on the table for supper like nothing had happened. There was a girl I used to see at the plaza. Her name was Luz Verdugo, and her family had one of the old adobes near the plaza, the kind with the thick walls and the red tile roof. Her grandfather had been someone important when the Mexicans ran things, an alcalde or something like that, but now they were just holding on to what was left. Luz had long black hair she wore in a braid down her back, and she didn't speak much English, just a few words, and I didn't speak much Spanish anymore, just what I remembered from when I was real little. But we'd see each other and smile, and sometimes when our mothers were busy talking, we'd walk around the plaza together, not saying much, just walking. I showed her how to skip stones in the river once, and she laughed when I showed off and missed. She tried to teach me some Spanish words, but I kept getting them wrong, and she'd laugh at that too. My father saw us together one time, and later he told me I shouldn't be spending time with Mexican girls, that people would talk, and it would be bad for business. I didn't understand that then, not really. She was just a girl who smiled at me, and I liked being around her. But I stopped talking to her after that, just nodded if I saw her, and eventually she stopped smiling, and I felt bad about it, but I didn't know what else to do. I was 12, maybe 13. What did I know about anything? The Chinese, they had it worse than the Mexicans. People talked about them like they weren't even human, like they were some kind of pest that needed to be gotten rid of. There were maybe 50 or 60 Chinese in Los Angeles then, mostly men who worked on the railroad or in laundries or as cooks. They kept to themselves in a little cluster of buildings near the plaza, what people called Chinatown, though it was barely a street. Mr. Wong from the laundry next door, he'd walk past our store every morning before dawn to get water from the Zanja, the irrigation ditch, carrying 2 buckets on a pole, across his shoulders. I'd hear the sound of the pole creaking, and I knew it was him. My father said the Chinese worked harder than anyone, that they'd work for wages no white man would take, and he said it like it was both a compliment and an insult at the same time. I didn't understand that either, not then. It happened in October of 1880. I know it was October because the grapes were being harvested, and you could smell the sweet rotting smell of the ones that had fallen and been crushed underfoot. I was 13 years old, and I thought I understood how the world worked, but I didn't understand anything, not really. It started over nothing, the way these things always do. Someone said a Chinese man had stolen something from a store. I don't even remember what it was supposed to be. A watch, maybe, or some money. The man they accused worked in one of the laundries. Not Mr. Wong's place, but another one down the street. I never knew his real name. Nobody bothered to learn Chinese names. He denied it. Of course he denied it. But that didn't matter. By late afternoon, there was a crowd gathering in the street, maybe 30 or 40 men, and they were angry in that way crowds get angry, where it's not really about the thing they say it's about, but about something bigger and darker that's been building up for a long time. There was a man named Dutch Keller who was leading them. He was a big man who worked at the stockyards, and he always smelled like blood and cow manure. He'd drink at the saloons and talk loud about how the Chinese were taking jobs from white men, how they were bringing disease, how they weren't Christian and couldn't be trusted. I'd heard him before, lots of times, standing on street corners riling people up. And there was this preacher, Reverend Thaddeus Grimm. He had a church in a tent near the river, and he'd preach fire and brimstone every Sunday about sinners and heathens and the wickedness of the world. He was there that day, too, holding a Bible in one hand and pointing with the other, saying the Chinese were corrupting good Christian values, saying they worshipped false idols, saying God wanted them driven out. I remember his voice, high and sharp like a knife, cutting through all the other noise. The crowd kept growing, more men coming from the saloons and the work sites. Some of them probably didn't even know what they were angry about. They just saw other men being angry and joined in, because that's what men do sometimes. My father was in the store, and he heard the commotion, and he went to the door to see what was happening. I was in the back, supposed to be sorting nails or something, but I followed him out because I was curious. We stood in the doorway and watched as the crowd moved down the street toward where the Chinese lived. My father's face went tight, and he said something under his breath, maybe a prayer. I don't know. Mr. Wong came out of his laundry, and he was trying to get to where the crowd was, walking fast but not running, and my father called out to him, "Don't go down there, Wong, stay here." But Mr. Wong just shook his head and kept going. I think he knew the man they were after. I think maybe they were friends or relatives or something. The crowd had the Chinese man in the middle of them now. I could see him through the gaps between bodies. He was small and thin, and his face was terrified, absolutely terrified, and they were pushing him and shouting, and someone hit him across the back of the head, and he stumbled. My father pulled me back inside and told me to go upstairs, but I didn't go upstairs. I went to the storage room in the back of the store, where we kept the big barrels of nails and flour and things. And there was a window back there that looked out onto the alley, and from that window I could see part of the street where the crowd had gone. I climbed up on a barrel and looked out, and I wish I hadn't. I wish I'd listened to my father and gone upstairs, but I was 13 and stupid, and I thought I needed to see. They had dragged the Chinese man to a big cottonwood tree near the plaza. A tree I'd climbed 100 times playing with Emmett. They threw a rope over one of the branches. I knew what was going to happen. Even at 13 I knew, but I couldn't look away. Mr. Wong was there trying to push through the crowd, shouting something in Chinese, and then in broken English. He didn't do nothing. He didn't take nothing. Please, please." And Dutch Keller turned and hit him square in the face, and Mr. Wong went down hard. Some other men started kicking him while he was on the ground, and I could hear the sounds of it even from where I was hiding, the dull thud of boots hitting flesh. Reverend Grimm was still there with his Bible, and I heard him say, "The Lord demands justice against the wicked," or something like that. I can't remember his exact words, but I remember the tone, righteous and cold and certain. They put the rope around the Chinese man's neck. He was crying. I could see that even from where I was, tears running down his face, and he was saying something, but I couldn't hear what. Someone in the crowd, I don't know who, said, "This is what happens when you people steal from us." And then they pulled the rope and hoisted him up. His feet kicked and kept kicking for what seemed like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. I watched the whole thing. I don't know why I didn't look away. I just couldn't. Maybe I thought if I looked away, it would be like I was pretending it wasn't happening, like I was as guilty as them for not seeing it. When he finally stopped moving, the crowd just stood there for a minute, quiet now, like they were surprised by what they'd done, or maybe ashamed, though I doubt most of them felt much shame. Then they started to break up, drifting away in small groups, back to the saloons, back to their homes, back to their lives, like nothing had happened. My father found me in the storage room. I don't know how long I'd been standing there on that barrel, staring out the window at the body hanging from the tree. He didn't say anything, just lifted me down and held me tight against his chest for a moment, tighter than he'd held me since I was small. Then he took me upstairs and told my mother to keep all of us inside, all the doors locked, all the curtains closed. We ate supper in silence that night. Cora asked what was happening, and my father said, "Nothing that concerns children," but his hands were shaking when he said it. Emmett, he had that look in his eyes like he wanted to ask questions, but didn't dare. Later that night, I could hear my parents talking in low voices, arguing about something, my mother crying. I heard her say, "This is what comes of hate," and my father said, "Keep your voice down, the children will hear," and then I couldn't make out the words anymore, just the sound of her weeping. Nobody ever talked about what happened that day, not in our house, not in the school, not in church. It was like it never happened at all. But I saw it. I can still see it when I close my eyes, 70-some years later, clear as anything. They cut the body down sometime during the night. I don't know who did it or where they took it. The next morning that cottonwood tree looked the same as it always had, like nothing had happened under its branches, and people walked past it, going about their business. But something had changed in me. I couldn't look at that tree the same way. I couldn't look at a lot of things the same way. Mr. Wong's face was swollen and purple for weeks after, one eye completely shut, and he moved slower, like his ribs were broken, which they probably were. His son stayed inside the laundry. I never saw him come out anymore. My mother tried to bring them food again, but Mr. Wong wouldn't answer the door. About a week later, maybe 10 days, I came home from school and the laundry was empty. They'd left in the night, just packed up whatever they could carry and disappeared. My father said they probably went to San Francisco, where there were more Chinese, where it might be safer, though I don't know if anywhere was really safe for them. The building stayed empty for months, and then an American family moved in and opened a dry goods store, and nobody ever mentioned the Wongs again, like they'd never existed at all. The Verdugo family, Luz's family, they lost their land that same year. There was a lawyer, Silas Pettigrew was his name, slick and smooth-talking with a fancy suit and a gold watch chain, and he'd been buying up property all over Los Angeles. Or rather, he'd been finding ways to take property from the old California families who couldn't read English documents and didn't understand American law. He claimed the Vertigos owed back taxes they didn't know about, brought papers to court that showed their land grant from the Mexican government wasn't valid anymore. Said they'd missed some deadline for registering the property under American law. I don't know all the details. I was just a boy, but I know it was a swindle. Everyone knew it was a swindle. But the judge ruled in Pettigrew's favor anyway, because that's how things worked. The Vertigos had 30 days to leave the adobe they'd lived in for 3 generations. I saw Luz one more time before they left. She was at the plaza with her mother, and her mother was crying. Not loud crying, but quiet tears running down her face, and Luz just looked empty, like something inside her had died. I wanted to say something to her, wanted to tell her I was sorry, but what good would that do? Sorry doesn't give you back your home. They moved to a little shack near the river, the kind of place that flooded every winter, and her father had to work as a day laborer, hauling things and digging ditches, when before he'd been a landowner, a man with status. That's how fast you could fall. Los Angeles was changing so fast in those years, it made your head spin. The railroad came through in 1881, the Southern Pacific Line connecting us to the rest of the country, and suddenly people were pouring in from everywhere. From the East Coast in the Midwest, people looking for sunshine and cheap land and a fresh start. They came in waves, hundreds and then thousands, and they needed places to live and places to work and places to shop. My father's business boomed. He had to hire 2 men to help in the store because he couldn't keep up with all the orders. He started selling barbed wire and lumber and tools for all the new construction going up everywhere you looked. We moved out of the rooms above the store into a real house with a yard. Nothing fancy, but it had 4 bedrooms and a parlor, and my mother cried when we first walked in, happy tears this time. Emmett got his own room finally, and so did Cora, and so did I. We had a water closet inside the house. Didn't have to use an outhouse anymore. My father bought a buggy and a horse, so he could ride around town looking prosperous. We were doing well. We were benefiting from all this growth, all these changes, and I didn't think about where that prosperity was coming from. Didn't think about the families being pushed out to make room for us. The Mexicans and Californios, they were being squeezed out everywhere. The plaza started to change. Fewer Mexican vendors, more American shops selling American goods. The Spanish language you used to hear everywhere started to fade. People speaking English, even if it wasn't their first language, because they had to, because that's what was expected now. The old adobes were being torn down or covered over with wooden facades to make them look more modern, more American. The vineyards were being ripped out to make room for housing tracts. The orange groves were expanding because Americans back east would pay good money for California oranges. And the men who owned those groves were getting rich, and the people picking the oranges were Mexicans and Chinese working for pennies. I saw all this happening, but I didn't really see it, you understand? I was living through it, but I wasn't paying attention to what it meant. Emmett, he turned 17 in 1882, and he started running with a group of young men, Americans all of them, who thought they were some kind of vigilantes keeping order in the city. They'd patrol the streets at night, looking for trouble, which usually meant looking for Mexicans or Chinese to harass. They called themselves the Law and Order Committee or some nonsense like that, like they had authority, but really they were just thugs with too much time and too much anger. My father didn't approve, but he didn't stop it either. Said boys needed to sow their oats. Said Emmett would settle down eventually. One night Emmett came home late. I heard him come in, and he was laughing with another boy about how they'd run some Mexicans out of a vacant lot where they'd been camping, earned their belongings, told them to get out of town or worse would happen. He was proud of it. My own brother, proud of terrorizing people who had nowhere else to go. I confronted him about it the next day, asked him how he could do something like that, and he looked at me like I was stupid. He said, "They don't belong here. This is our city now." They need to accept that or leave. I said, Mama's people were here first. And he said, Mama's people lost. That's how it works. The strong take from the weak. I wanted to hit him. I didn't, but I wanted to. After that, we barely spoke. He moved out a year later, got a job working for one of the land developers, helping to survey properties and move people off land they claimed was needed for development. He was good at it, made decent money, became exactly the kind of man I didn't want to be. I'm 85 years old now, and most of the people I knew back then are dead. Emmett died in France in 1918, killed in the Argonne forest during the last big push of the war. He was 49 years old. They sent his belongings back in a box, and there wasn't much. A few letters, a pocket watch, a photograph of a girl I never met. My mother cried for weeks. I couldn't cry for him. I tried, but I couldn't. I'd stopped knowing who my brother was a long time before he died. Cora married a banker and moved to San Francisco in 1895. Had 4 children, lived a good life as far as I know. We exchanged letters for years, but we were never close after we grew up. She died 3 years ago, pneumonia. I went to the funeral and looked at her in the casket and tried to remember the little girl who used to read by the window, but I couldn't find her in that old woman's face. I became a teacher. After I finished school, I went to normal school in San Francisco, studied history and literature, came back to Los Angeles in 1890, and started teaching. I taught for 40 years, retired in 1930, right before everything fell apart with the Depression. I taught history because I thought someone needed to tell the truth about how this city was built, about who was here before and what happened to them. I don't know if I did any good. Most of my students probably forgot everything I taught them as soon as they walked out the door. But I tried. I taught about the California families and the land grants and how the American courts took their property through legal theft. I taught about the Chinese Exclusion Act and the racism that made it possible. I taught about the violence, the lynchings, the way people were driven out of their homes and their history was erased. Some parents complained. The school board called me in a few times, told me to stick to the approved curriculum, but I kept teaching what I thought they needed to know. Maybe that was my own small rebellion, like my mother bringing food to Mr. Wong. I saw Les Verdugo one more time. Years later, it must have been 1920 or thereabouts. I was 43 years old, married by then with 2 children of my own. I was at the Biltmore Hotel downtown with my wife, some kind of reception or dinner. I don't remember what. There was a woman cleaning one of the hallways, mopping the floor, and something about the way she moved made me look twice. It was her. Older, heavier, tired-looking, but it was her. I knew it was her. She looked up, and our eyes met, and I saw recognition there, just for a second, and then she looked back down at her mop and kept working. I should have said something. I should have walked over and said hello, asked how she was, acknowledged that I knew her, that I remembered. But I didn't. I just stood there like a coward, and then my wife took my arm, and we went into the ballroom, and I spent the evening making small talk with people I didn't care about. That hotel, the Biltmore, it was built on land that used to be part of her family's rancho. She was cleaning floors in a building that stood on ground her grandfather once owned. I've thought about that moment at least once a week for the past 32 years. What I should have said, what I should have done. I never told anyone about what I saw that day in October of 1880, the day they hanged that Chinese man. Not my wife, not my children, not my students. I carried it inside me like a stone in my chest for 71 years. I'm telling it now because I'm old, and I don't have much time left, and someone needs to know that it happened. Someone needs to remember. That cottonwood tree where they hanged him, it was cut down in 1938 to make room for a parking lot. There's an office building there now. People park their cars there every day, and they have no idea what happened on that spot. There's no marker, no memorial, nothing to say a man died there for a crime he didn't commit. His name is lost. Nobody recorded it. Nobody thought a Chinese man's name was worth writing down. But he existed. He lived, and he worked, and he died badly, and he deserves to be remembered even if I don't know his name. Los Angeles today, in 1952, it's enormous. Over 2 million people living here now, stretching out in every direction as far as you can see. Freeways cutting through neighborhoods, cars everywhere, houses covering every inch of land right up into the hills. It's nothing like the dusty little town I knew as a boy. Sometimes I drive around and I can't even tell where I am. Can't recognize anything. The plaza is still there, but it's surrounded by parking lots and wholesale buildings. The old adobes are mostly gone. The Chinese who came back after the exclusion laws were lifted, they're in a different part of town now. The Mexicans are still here, more of them than ever, but they live in separate neighborhoods, work jobs nobody else wants, get treated about the same as they were treated back then. We didn't learn much, I guess. I thought maybe we would, but we didn't. This city was built on injustices we decided to forget. On violence, we pretended never happened. On theft, we called progress. I benefited from all of it. My father's store prospered. I got an education. I lived a comfortable life. And I stayed silent for 71 years. I'm telling this now because I don't want to die with this silence. Someone needs to know. You need to know. Whoever listens to this recording years from now, you need to know that the Los Angeles you live in was built on top of another Los Angeles that we erased. And maybe if you know that, maybe you'll do better than we did. That's all I can hope for.